I'm Brian Cantrell. I'm the CTO of Joint. I feel the expectations have been set very, very high. You're expecting me to have kind of a seizure on stage. I don't know if I'm going to be able to oblige or not. I am going to talk about leaping the chasm from proprietary to open. I feel that I should kind of come in bandages. I've leapt this chasm so many times and have been injured so many times, and I've kind of sworn to never leap it again. It's the last one was kind of the last one for me, but we're going to go through all of this. But first, we're going, as I am wont to do, let's turn back the history dial and let's look at the history of open source. Because in the beginning of the beginning, it was actually all source code. There was no such thing as open source because there were really no such thing as proprietary binaries because you just shipped the software. And by the way, the software wasn't the valuable thing. It was the iron was the valuable thing. The metal was the valuable thing. The software was just something that a bunch of hippies wrote. I mean, it wasn't actually that interesting. Over time, it became clear that actually the software had the value, that actually the iron was being replaced with every generation, and the software was still somehow kicking around. And it became clear that people wanted to pay for the software as much or more than the hardware. And as it was actually IBM that, in terms of enterprise software, that led the move, of course, as they are wont to do, to the proprietary model. And a friend of mine by the name of Tom Hill worked for EDS for like 5 millennia. He worked for EDS from the very beginning. Tom knows where all the bodies are buried in enterprise software. He's a great guy to talk to. And Tom and I were talking about open source one day, and he actually whipped out this little black book. And it was clear that he had had this book with him the entire time. God only knows what kind of secrets are in that book. And he opens up this book. He says, there, look, I made a note to myself. February 17th, 1983. And that is when Tom met with the IBM representative who explained to him that IBM was moving to an object-only model. Like this is a good thing. It's like, oh, we're not gonna burden you with all that source code anymore. You're only gonna get these nice lean objects. It's like, it does not sound like a good thing. And Tom said, I knew at that moment that the software industry had changed forever, and that we were going to a proprietary model, and we at EDS had relied on our ability to look at the source code and actually understand what the hell was going on. And now we were going to have to shift. So IBM led to on the enterprise side. And of course, the personal computer was kind of born out of hobbyists. And then one very cranky teenager, a guy named William Gates, worked for a software company, Micro-Soft in Albuquerque, New Mexico, got very, very indignant when people were using his basic interpreter without paying him, and wrote a letter in 1976, an open letter to hobbyists, where he explained that you actually need to pay me for this, that you are all stealing my software. The thing that's interesting about it is, on the one hand, it is cranky, and it definitely, it was a total buzzkill for, the homebrew computer club, I can tell you that. On the other hand, he actually makes some legitimate points, and one of the points he says is, I can't create documentation and fully test this thing if you're not going to pay for this. Of course, then he goes on to make a bunch of other claims that are ridiculous. But that letter definitely set the tone for what would happen with personal computing. And personal computing was deeply, deeply proprietary from essentially then on out. And we get to the point where it's the mid-1990s. And it's very hard for me personally to reflect back on the mid-1990s because this is when I graduated from school. I was kind of going through school in the mid-1990s. I think it's always hard for anyone to reflect back on the time where they entered adulthood because it always seems like it's a special, unique time. And things are always much better or much worse than they were then. And that was totally unique. And nobody understood us then. It's like, well, actually, you were just 22. It's not that big of a deal. But that said, this actually was different. I actually do, reflecting back in the mid-1990s, it actually did suck. It's not just me. The world was incredibly proprietary and incredibly ossified. It was Windows. It was proprietary Unix. It was proprietary software as far as the eye could see. Languages were going the wrong way. We talked about pouring one out for Saas. How much rage did Sun induce when they stopped shipping the compilers with Saas? It was probably the single factor that was the downfall of Sun Microsystems, was not shipping the compilers with Solaris the way they had with Saas. Never mind, bubbles and busts and sparks that didn't perform and eCache parity errors and everything else. It was not shipping the compilers, damn it. That was the downfall of Sun Microsystems. But we were in a very proprietary, again, very ossified world. And a lot of things were considered done, which I can tell you as a young person coming into the industry felt very oppressive. Operating systems were done, languages were done, databases were done, and when I went to go work for Sun Microsystems in 1996, I went to go work for Sun because Sun, gallingly, was the only computer company whose Unix story was Unix, as opposed to actually becoming Windows NT. Every other computer company was selling out as quickly as they could to Microsoft because Windows NT was the future. I went to Sun because Sun alone believed in Unix. So, and I know it's easy to kind of decry Sun, and Sun was a very flawed entity in a lot of ways, but know this. It was Sun that stood with Unix alone in the intensive care unit when everyone else had left Unix for dead. Okay? Sun was the one reading to Unix quietly when everyone else had moved on to a new spouse. Just remember that. So we were at this kind of this really low point, and then the internet came. And as you kind of go calculate this in terms of like, why did open source happen? Would it have happened otherwise? Open source, I think, and obviously there's lots of room for different perspectives on this. I think open source happened because of the internet. Was open source inevitable because of the internet? I think maybe, I don't know. I think that the truly key, the catalytic technology, the two catalytic technologies, I think, are Perl and Apache. Actually, not Linux. People are like, I think people sometimes say like, oh, the GPL served this kind of critical role. I'm not actually sure about that. And the reason for that is because the two technologies that were the catalysts weren't actually Linux, which came along actually later. It was around, but it wasn't actually in use. It was Perl and Apache that were the first open source projects that people were actually using a lot because they did things together that you couldn't do with commercial software. And I mean, I think actually the reason that open source took off is it because it leapt ahead of proprietary software. Proprietary software was so ossified that open source software was doing something that proprietary software couldn't do. It wasn't that people, user freedom and all the other great stuff. That wasn't it. That wasn't it. It was that open source software did something different. And from there, free and open began to dominate, especially for de novo software written not by a commercial software company. So of course Perl, and then Python, MySQL, Postgres, Apache, then Linux and BSD. And there are these two poles of you had people that just needed to use this stuff, and then a lot of academic institutions. Python is an academic exercise. Postgres is an academic exercise. So open source begins to blossom, which is great. I mean, thank God for the internet. Proprietary software obviously remained, but the cost was being driven down to zero. You used to be able to monetize your operating system. Okay, database is a little more complicated, but you used to be able to monetize these things, and graciously that was being beaten down to zero. And this early, especially on programming languages, another good example, where programming languages are basically, now the expectation is that they're free. And free, and in some cases open, in other cases free and proprietary. So we enter in this kind of strange world where the proprietary world is free but proprietary, like Java, and the open world is free and open, like Perl. But the proprietary commercial folks are still on the proprietary side of that chasm. The source is closed, but it's often freely available. And this was true actually of operating systems as well. There are other infrastructure software becoming free but still closed in the late 90s. Then the bust happened. And if you are, fortunately I can see that there are plenty of people in the room who were around for the last bubble, and I'm sure you're just as annoyed by this one as I am. You're like, what the hell? Was I the only one paying attention when they're, and it's like, oh, it's gonna go on forever, this changes everything. It's like, no, stop, seriously, it's not gonna go on forever. It's like, it's gonna be really bad when it happens. When the bust happens, it's gonna be really bad. And I find that and I'm sure if you survive the bust, you probably find this as well. You start to tell tales of the bust, and all of a sudden you've got this like semicircle of millennials staring at you with wide eyes, like, and then what happened? And it's like, well, and then the traffic got better. Really, the traffic got better. Yeah, it was amazing. The traffic got better like overnight. It was scary. I mean, if you were in Silicon Valley when the bust happened, the traffic, you know what I'm talking about. You know those 3 months that I'm talking about, where all of a sudden it's like, where did the traffic go? Like, why is there no traffic? I get it, like the world is ending, but seriously? Like, there's no traffic anymore. It was crazy. So this is what I do now. I tell stories from the Great Depression to millennials. But the bust, it changed things a lot, and for the better in a lot of ways. Because in that nuclear winter, and having worked for Sun at the time, I can tell you that we were as affected by that, more so than anyone. But in that nuclear winter, people were forced to now choose open source. It wasn't a like, well, we might choose open source. And now you're in kind of a new calculus where it used to be, I'm using Perl and Apache and what have you because it's the right tool for the job. Now you're moving into a calculus of like, well, I know this thing isn't quite as good as the proprietary thing that it's replacing, but it's actually free, and I have to use this because I can't actually scale out using the traditional ways. I just don't have enough money. If I'm Google, I'm venture funded during this period of time. So the companies that were born during this era were born on scale out compute, and they were born on purely open source software. Now, one thing that was a little bit grating during this period of time is that these companies would build themselves on open source software as well they should, but they weren't contributing a lot back. So there was an era where I mean, just bluntly, Google was particularly obnoxious about, like, we love open source. It's like, yeah, of course you love open source, because it's awesome for you. You're not contributing enough back. And now, to their credit, they began to actually, a lot of these companies realized that actually we don't have to contribute some of this stuff back, but we should. And it's not just in our self-interest. Open source has played a huge role of who we are at Google, who we are at Yahoo, who we are at Facebook, and we should give something back. Now, that said, there were some companies kind of early in the early 2000s that did actually take their proprietary software and make it open source. So there are counterexamples, and they were really purely in those kind of infrastructural software domains. And Sun was one of those, notable. So Sun, really alone among the proprietary Unix vendors, Sun elected to open source the operating system. And actually only Sun could do this because everyone else was so restricted by covenants with AT&T. The Unix wars cast a very, very, very long shadow. The Unix wars, being the lawsuit between AT&T and BSD, cast a very, very long shadow. And one aspect of that shadow is that all these other Unices actually couldn't be open because of the covenant they had with AT&T. Only Sun had bought itself out of the AT&T deal and could actually open source everything. Even still, we had to go around. When you're born proprietary and you live in an all-proprietary world, you don't bother when you're having someone write source code for you, have a contractor write something for you. You don't bother putting a covenant in there that you can later open source it or that you later own copyright. And we found that there were a bunch of covenants that restricted what we could do with the operating system. It was exceedingly painful to open source it. The very first conversation I can remember about open sourcing it was in 1997. The very first time an executive said, yes, we will do it, was 1999. We open sourced it in 2005. It was a long, painful road. In fact, 10 years ago, I was at OSCON talking about open Solaris. So talk about pouring one out. And actually, I saw Roman's tweet about wearing the open Solaris t-shirt. My open Solaris t-shirts have all disintegrated. I don't know if you had that thing like under glass for the last 10 years or how you did it. But a t-shirt just does not, software lasts a lot longer than a t-shirt, as it turns out. And the t-shirts have disintegrated. Fortunately, the source code is still there. So we were at OSCON 10 years ago. I know that this is somewhat controversial, but I just, for the record, I've said this before. We did not GPL it. The reason we did not GPL it is because we had independent hardware vendors for whom, if we GPL'd it, we were going to force them into the legal quagmire that NVIDIA was in. And with Linux, they just kind of plowed through it and allowed NVIDIA to ship binary drivers and a tainted kernel. That wasn't actually acceptable to our IHVs. So we had a license that we liked a lot called the Cuddle. The Cuddle was basically a cleaned up MPL. I really like MPL. MPL is a weak copyleft license. It's a copyleft. It's file-based. So if you modify this file and you ship software on it, you need to ship your modifications. But you can put it with larger things that aren't covered under this license. It's free in that regard. So we really like that. We really like the Cuddle. And that was successful for us. But there's obviously been kind of a dark epitaph to that, in that it's been the Cuddle that has kept dtrace, ZFS, and so on out of Linux, but not because of the Cuddle, because of the perceptions of the GPL. So if you were wondering how many minutes we would make it in before we hit licensing, well, it looks like we hit about 15, so sorry about that. So after being open sourced, Solaris itself was developed entirely in the open. I think, love a counterexample, I think this is the largest single software project in history to completely leap the chasm from proprietary to open. Everything done as closed source now, everything done in the open. As soon as a push happens, it shows up to everybody. And this is an era before GitHub, and so this is a big deal. And this was amazing that we were able to pull this off, and it was great. And then, a darkness across the land. So Oracle acquired Sun in 2010, originally announced 2009, closed in 2010. And I've been on the record a couple of times about Oracle. I've been rather unvarnished with my opinions about Oracle over the years. I will say that, fortunately, it's all factual. The one thing I would say about Oracle is Oracle is an entity that defies stereotype in that everything that you think about Oracle is actually truer than you think it could possibly be. So it's amazing. It's a cartoon. And so Oracle actually it's funny. So I was giving a history of the operating system called Forkia Lumos, and I gave this talk at Usenix, and I got a little colorful about Oracle at one point, and at least unvarnished. And to the point that at the end of the presentation, people were like, God, are you going to be okay? I mean, are you worried at all? And the thing is like, no, look, I know what you're doing. What you're doing is you are transposing human attributes onto Oracle. You are anthropomorphizing Larry Ellison. That's a mistake. That Oracle is mechanized. They don't care what you say about them. It's like it's like you're making fun of the lawnmower. Lawnmower does not care what you say about the lawnmower. Lawnmower cuts grass, okay? So this is an important thing to know. It's like, oh, we can't say anything bad about Oracle. It's like, you can say whatever you want about Oracle. It doesn't matter. It's like, it has no mirror neurons. It doesn't matter. So whatever. I didn't care. But the videos for all this thing, this talk come up, and the videos for every talk comes up except for mine. And my coworkers are like, oh my God, it's an Oracle conspiracy. I'm like, hey, lawnmower people, lawnmower, doesn't care. But it goes on for a little while, like, a week passed, 2 weeks passed. Like, all right, actually, where the hell is this video? And finally, the video shows up, and the video's put online. And the format of the video is you got the slides, you got me kind of talking down here. And before the video starts, there's this giant disclaimer that they've never put on any video before about the following opinions do not represent the opinions of the users organizations. Like, oh, brother. All right, fine. So you got this giant disclaimer. Yeah, I get it. Okay. Then you get to the video, and again, it's got the slides, got me talking down here. They've taken this disclaimer and reformatted it and put it above my head the entire time I'm speaking. You're like, what is that? So anyway, and there's so much at Oracle I did not say. So that's a really amazing thing. It's like, I didn't even use Nazi allegory once. And to not use Nazi allegory when talking about Oracle is to leave some understanding on the table. I was so well behaved. Anyway, so the Oracle, in keeping with this kind of cartoonish perspective of Oracle did this amazing thing that only Oracle could do. They closed the operating system. It's like they reproprietarized it. It's like, is there a closed con next to OzCon that I can go to? Is there an asshole con? What do we call that? What do we call the con where we have all the people and all the BOFs and all the working groups on taking open source software and making it proprietary, you assholes? But so this is what they did. And we will no longer distribute source code for the entirety of the source operating system in real time. And disgusting, cowardly behavior, depraved behavior, ripped up the social contract that so many people had that had contributed to that operating system and had foolishly, as it turns out, assigned copyright to Sun Microsystems. Their software was now being made proprietary. And I understand that it's not illegal, but it's wrong. It's wrong. And by the way, it was foreshadowing. It was foreshadowing for something even more despicable and more disgusting. And that is the assertion that APIs are copyrightable. That is wrong. That's not like legally wrong. That's natural law wrong. That is wrong. And frankly, it's depressing to me that I was in the FSF talk, love the FSF. Why are you talking about getting open firmware on a phone and running a fucking ThinkPad when you actually have the devil is in the midst trying to undermine not just open source software, but software? This is the problem. That is the problem. Focus your rage and your hate and your anger on this, because this is a serious problem. Now, does it mean if you work for Oracle that like you're doing the wrong thing or that I think less of you? Yes. That's exactly what it means. If you work for Oracle, your name is next to this. Your name is on the flag. I do think less of you. I'm sorry. Like, you don't have to think anything of me thinking less of you. Why is me thinking less of you a problem? Unless that's your conscience. Am I the voice of your... Anyway. I promised I would self-medicate before this, and that didn't work out. So this is just like, again, mind-bending. It is absolutely mind-bending, and it is a very serious problem. It is a mortal threat, and unfortunately, this is what kills me, is that all of the kind of the cynicism is rewarded by this. We now have to be cynical. We have to assume the worst behavior, because the worst behavior is unfolding in front of our eyes. Now, the good news is that you can't actually close something. That CloseCon is actually not an interesting conference because you can't actually reproprietarize something. All you can do is fork it. And actually, kind of an interesting story here. There was actually, maybe I won't tell that story. Let me just say this: that there was a very strange, very perverse attempt to undermine the patent provision of the cuddle, which is basically the patent provision of the MPL. And if that could have been undermined, it would have been. And it wasn't because they couldn't. So a huge tribute to the lawyers that actually wrote that they actually made that airtight. And in particular, there was a desire to extend the patent license that you get in the cuddle, a desire to extend that only to certain parties and not to all comers. That did not prevail, thank God. So thankfully, like, the license worked. The license held. The license held at its critical moment. Open source held at its critical moment, and the source code itself was out there. We were all, because there are maybe other people comfortable with their name on the Oracle flag, but mine is not among them. I left, a lot of people left, and we came to Illumos. Illumos was a new community, was now 5 years ago, a new community consisting of not just the diaspora, the Saas diaspora. There were a lot of other folks as well, but a lot of new blood, and that's been great. To me, this is a total success story for open source, where you have basically the very worst possible thing happen to it. You have a bunch of people get in a boat and go to a new world, and they're able to settle there and actually do really well. So we've got a lot of distributions now, OmniOS, SmartOS, and so on. And these are, Illumos is the repo of record for ZFS, for dtrace, for containers. We got a lot of new blood. I love nothing more than you get 19, 20, 21, 22-year-olds who are excited about this operating system, which is great. And they realize how much old, crufty code is in it, and they become, well, that's all right. By that point in time, they're already hooked. So that's been great, and that's been a real tribute to kind of open source. But the whole kind of adventure, the open source adventure, we can use as an object lesson, because we did some things right and we did some things wrong. And I actually gave a talk on this at FISLA in 2012 on corporate open source anti-patterns. I'm not going to go through all of that, but I do want to hit on a couple of these, because these are important. Ultimately, if you are developing commercial software and you're going to make that open, ultimately that's a business decision. And as an engineer, I would love to just do it. But no, you can't actually just do it. You actually need to make a business decision that it's the right business decision. And it's your job as an engineer to help make that case about why this is the right decision. And in particular, and I would say as kind of the biggest possible theme, is you've got to move past fear to opportunity. I said opportunity instead of greed because it sounded better, but really it's fear versus greed, and you're trying to get to greed and away from fear, right? You need to move past the fear. What are the fears? The fears are, oh my God, none of my customers are ever going to buy anything from me. That I'm going to make this open source, and all my customers are not going to buy it. It's like, well, that's so are you an asshole? Because if you're not an asshole, that's probably not going to happen. If your customers are probably buying your software and the support you provide them for something other than simply the artifact, right? There's something more there. So if there's something more there, you actually probably don't need to worry about that as much as you might think. And you can go talk to those customers and find out. But in general, you're not endangering revenue as much as you might think. And remember that a customer that's going to take your software and is going to operate it themselves and be totally self-sufficient, and when there's a bug, they're going to fix it, that customer wasn't going to buy your software anyway. The choice was not this customer gives me money or doesn't give me money. That's not what it is. It is this customer, the customer that is going to operate it and self-support and so on, they're going to run your software or they're going to run someone else's software that's open source. Open source is a constraint for that customer. And you know who that customer is because it's you and it's me. Right? We're in this boat, right? You hear about anything that some great new technology. I'm sure your first question is my first question. Is like, oh, wow, that sounds really exciting. Is that open source? Is that something that I can use? Because if it's not open source, I'm just not interested. And it's not because I don't ultimately want to pay for support or what have you. It's because open source is a constraint on my problem. So these guys that are going to operate in self-support anyway aren't going to be customers anyway. So you want to give them, would you rather have them run your software or have them run something else? That's the question. And no, your competitors aren't going to steal it. The other thing is like, oh, my competitors are going to steal it. It's like, actually, your competitors think you're a jackass. That's why they work for their competitors. Like, if they thought you were such a genius, they'd come work over here. So in fact, and when we open sourced, so the very first thing that we open sourced at Sun was dtrace, software that I developed. And one of the things that we learned from that is actually the not invented here syndrome is very, very powerful. And people will actually not adopt software just because their perceived competitor developed it. So that's a very powerful idea. The other thing I would say is don't be forkophobic. One of the mistakes we made is that we were totally forkophobic. Oh, what if someone forks it? And so we made it it was technically hard for accidentally, but we made it kind of organizationally and socially hard to fork it. That was a really bad idea because you want to be forkophobic. This is something that Linux did very, very, very well. Because the easier it is to fork your software, the harder it is to fork your community. It's the forking paradox. You do not want to fetishize governance or process. Most projects don't need them. For most projects, GitHub is enough. From my perspective, and again, I don't want to sidetrack us too much, you want to prefer, especially actually if you're proprietary, you do want to prefer permissive or weak copyleft licenses over strong copyleft licenses because you want adoption. And you do not want license incompatibility. License incompatibility is very sad. And it makes me very sad when people are like, God, if I only had dtrace on Linux. I'm like, I want you to. Trust me, I want you to. If for nothing else, to kill all this other nonsense that you have to deal with. Anyway, but whatever. And then another important thing that organizations struggle with is you've got to elevate your people when you make something open source, because ultimately open source is about people. Denise Cooper is fond of saying this. Open source is about people, and it's not organizations that are innovative, it's people that are innovative. And open source provides you that transparency, that opportunity for transparency. Okay, so that was open source and kind of what we learned there. And again, there's a lot more detail online for that. Then the cloud happened. And with the rise of cloud computing in the kind of the mid-late 2000s, now you've got more and more software being born open, which is great. And kind of an interesting thing, a discussion we can have over cocktails, to what degree was that trend accelerated versus reflected by GitHub? And I think it's kind of impossible to reason about because it happened at the same time. But and my sense is there's probably a little bit of both. I think that GitHub did actually accelerate the adoption and the proliferation of open source. But certainly it reflected it, if nothing else. And you had some large companies open sourcing actually de novo software. I'd call out a couple that I think are important. These all happened at about the same time, 2007, 2008. Up until that time, you hadn't had patches have been contributed back, but you hadn't had things that were really interesting. You saw Yahoo's Hadoop, Google's V8, Facebook's Hive. And this has actually accelerated so much that the problem now is not, can I find something open source? It's like, oh my God, which one of these things do I use? Like, are these things even, do they compete with one another? Are they friends? Like, they don't even know. Like, you ask, I mean, it's like, there are so many of these things where it's such a zoo, it's great, of open source. So open source has really succeeded, but. There is a new kind of proprietary software. Software as a service is the new proprietary software. It is proprietary software striking back. And lock-in from those services, especially when it's a platform as a service, can be just as acute as the traditional lock-in. And adding insult to injury to really kind of like, the proprietary services often take things that are open source and turn them into a service. Not to pick on Amazon, but we're going to go pick on Amazon. Amazon's Elastic Compute Service. Is that Mesos or not? Looks like Mesos, smells like Mesos, feels like Mesos. What's that? Is it? It is a duck. It's a duck. Okay. So you've got something where you've got a bunch of people that have contributed to something that's open source that now Amazon is controlling the till on. Well, that doesn't make a lot of sense. That's not really very nice. And yes, it's legal, right? Because they're not violating any license, but it's unsporting and it rips up again the social contract. And indeed, actually, because this is the new vector, GPL's copyleft is simply obviated. I mean, it makes sense in a world of shrink-wrap software, but when people are doing that, no amount of GPL, it's like, oh, how about AGPL? It's like, how about not AGPL? How about suicide bombers? It's like, no, that's a very bad idea. No, we're not going to do that. Really, like, slow your roll on the AGPL. Not going to work. Not going to work because, by the way, the AGPL very well may assume rights that the copyright holder does not have. If you publish a book, you don't get to say where that book is read and how. So the AGPL is not the answer, and indeed, coercion is not the answer. We can't coerce people. And this is the reason that I'm a proponent of more permissive licenses, because GPL doesn't actually solve the problem anymore, and they coerce people for no reason. We can't coerce. We have to encourage contribution in a different way. So into that, we've got SmartDatacenter. So all of this made me kind of hypocritical for many years, because I was the same. I had this kind of proprietary software, SmartDatacenter, that was built on Node and SmartOS and other things. SmartOS is open source, SmartOS being our Lumos variant. But this was all proprietary. And really, really, really wanted to make this publicly available, wanted to make this open source. It's really technically hard, actually. When something is born proprietary, there are technical difficulties. When someone is saying they're struggling to open source something, please take them at their word. Because you can be very earnest about wanting to open source something, but there are lots of technical details that may make it really difficult, dependencies and so on. You've got a lot of risk. You've got secrets. Are you going to do the Git histories? Because if you are, then, oh yeah, remember that time when we accidentally pushed our private keys back to the repo? We backed it out a second later. Remember that? It's like, well, yeah, someone's got to do something about that. You got to go scrub the histories. I mean, this is a significant technical undertaking. And for us, it was even worse, because SmartDatacenter depended on Manta. Manta is an object storage service that we developed that was, at the time, again, also proprietary. And unfortunately, we were developing more and more dependencies on Manta. Manta is awesome. It's a container-based storage service that allows you to spin up a container where your objects actually live. So it's like S3, but you don't have to pull objects out to actually run something on them. Like if you want to run grep on your log files, like you can just run grep as opposed to having to pull it out of S3 and run grep on it. We're big believers in Unix like that. So anyway, we love Manta and we're using it everywhere. But now the problem is, like, well, we're using it everywhere, and now we've created this whole nasty hornet's nest. And if it needs to be said, it's much, much, much easier to be born open than to become open. And so for the software that you write, even the one that's inside the corporate walls, assume that it's open. So use a private GitHub repo. So it is effectively open. It's on the internet. It's just that you haven't clicked the button yet to open it. Really recommend that. So finally, after many years, we had wanted to, again, open source SDC and Manta for a long, long time. It took a lot longer than we would have liked, in part because it's so easy to veto. It's so easy for someone to say, not this year. I'm with you, but maybe next year. Maybe next year. Maybe next year, Brian. Maybe next year. Not that I heard this a lot, but it's like, OK, enough. Like, we got to actually go do this. And actually, it really helped. All of you helped. And the catalyst for this, and actually Roman Spachnik at Pivotal, Roman played a key role here, because Roman at one point is like, hey, Brian, I got a random question for you. Why don't you open source SmartDatacenter Manta? And I was like, and he's like, oh, you thought of this before? And I'm like, okay, I need to be around, not around any sharp objects. But Roman is like, hey, you know what? We at Pivotal can help you make the case. And Pivotal did, and it was great. So, excuse me, this was clutch for us. And now we did make the case, and there were two arguments that carried the day. The first argument is, infrastructure software must be open source. This is the new constraint, and God bless it. Please don't let anyone tell you that the world has gotten so much worse for open source, and oh my God, my phone is proprietary, so let's all go to the top of the Oregon Convention Center and jump. No, I'm sorry, that's just not what it is. Open source won. In infrastructure software, open source won, and it's awesome. It is unequivocally a constraint for new infrastructure software, and it's going up stack. Software, increasingly, software that's used as a foundation or as a component is becoming open source or has to become open source, or even better, is born open source. The Kubernetes model, born open source. Open sourcing Borg, probably not technically possible for Google. Using Borg's lessons to build something new in the open, definitely possible. Docker's a great testament to this, right? Docker, closed, no one cared, .cloud, failing paths. Let's open source it. Kaboom! All of a sudden we have it's like all the venture capitalists are like, hey, what's going on? Whoa, what happened? I heard a huge noise. I just came out of here. Like, where do I need to write checks? So there should be like a little like, did you feel it? If you're in the Bay Area, you got the, like, did you feel it at the USGS? Like, did you feel Docker? It's like, my God, I've felt Docker all the way in Petaluma. And that helped us make the case. The other thing that helped us make the case, so that is specific to the domain that we are in, infrastructure software. The thing that's not specific to our domain is open source as a vector for hiring. Almost all of us need to hire. You go out to that job board, and it's great to see, and God let us please never be reminiscing about back in the day when anyone could get a job doing anything. But there's so many people we have so many needs for software engineering, software development. Hiring is really hard for all of us. And hiring is hard. It's not just finding people smart enough. Like, that's smart is, if you're, a bunch of you are old enough like I am, you know that like smart is only like a fraction of it. Smart's great, but necessary but not sufficient. And you need a lot more than that. You want people that are motivated by the same things you're motivated by, that have the same ethos about developing software that you have, that are motivated by the mission that you have. That's what you want. And great, guess what? Open source attracts those people. You put out your open source project, and you naturally attract the people that are attracted to what you're attracted to. Same ideas, same way of doing things, same way of thinking about this. Tabs or spaces. You get, okay, not tabs or spaces, that's never going to be resolved. Ultimately, when the world gets embroiled in software engineering civil war, it's going to be versus white space, over white space, we know that. But by open sourcing, you're able to find these people and they are able to self-identify. It is cheap. It is highly efficient. You get a great deal of fidelity. It's not predictable. This is the one thing that people don't like about it, which rightfully so. It's like, okay, wow, this is amazing. I need 10 more like that. Like, yeah, about that. We can't necessarily turn the dial on that one. It's like, maybe 10 more will show up. Maybe 20 will show up, in which case we need to hire all of them. You don't necessarily know. So you don't have the fidelity, but you do have everything else. And for us at Joyent, it's been critical. Our greatest hires have come out of the open source communities, and by the way, they're not in Silicon Valley. They're all over the world, which is great. So it allows you to be remote friendly, and we've got terrific engineers in godforsaken locations where hey, godforsaken locations where hey, at least you can buy a driveway for less than $600,000. So it's great. Anyway, it's our farm system that's been very, very, very important to us. So we finally left the chasm with SDC Manta on November 6, 2014. We actually open sourced it all. We moved to an all open company. The only proprietary software we have is the software that contains actually true secrets, things like billing software. Everything else is open. Everything else is born open. We had this new service, Triton, that we announced. Triton is a Docker service that allows you to run Docker containers on the metal, data center wide. That was all born open. And so everything we're going to do now, from now on, is we're being born open. I'm not leaping the chasm again. It's too gory. And as a result, we found that our technologies are being used in places that they wouldn't have been used otherwise. The very first person to stand up SmartDatacenter did it during an OpenStack outage, which I thought was just delicious. An OpenStack outage that entered its 90th hour, he stood up SmartDatacenter and was off and running, and it was great. And our first hire materialized only weeks after we open sourced it. Amusingly, our first hire was not an engineer. Our first hire actually came in to product and came in and was like, I followed Joyent for years. I used to run you guys. I used to operate the SmartDatacenter on my own. And when you open sourced it, I knew I wanted to work for this company. And he wrote this letter that is just like, this person would have to be criminal for us not to hire him. If he's not a convicted arsonist, he's hired. And even then, actually, I can look past arson. So we'll find a way to make it work. So that's been terrific, and many more have followed, and from around the globe. It has been great and so validating. In terms of licensing, we selected the MPL2. I love the MPL v2. To me, it's the perfect license. I know it's not popular. I know it's a new license. People don't read it. It's all Apache and BSD and so on, which is fine. Those are great. But to me, it's got the explicit warranting of original work, because I actually love contributors, but I hate contributor license agreements. It's like, hey, great job. Thanks for contributing this. Do you know where your lawyer sits? It's like, why? It's like, you need to talk to that person. Like, I hate lawyers. It's like, yeah, no, I know. Or actually, not even I hate lawyers. Like, I'm afraid of lawyers. It's like, you're like asking a fawn to go to like New York City, and it's like, no, it doesn't make sense. So we don't have to have a CLA with the MPL. We don't like the licensing compatibilities. The MPL is explicitly license compatible, which is great. You got patent troll protection, that same enterprise grade, trust me, patent troll protection that we had in the MPL1 and the Cuddle. Great license. It really merits broader consideration. So and I'm going to wrap up here in the next 2 minutes. So in terms of, I know I'm going a little bit over, in terms of governance, everyone loves governance as much as license. Only thing better than licenses are governance. So for governance, we've done what you should do for most of your open source projects, which is don't solve a problem you don't have to solve. And for most open source projects are low traffic, and that's fine. One of the major disagreements I have with Denise, good-spirited, but a major disagreement. Denise thinks that you shouldn't open source something unless you're going to be dedicated to it and you're going to put people behind it and so on. I'm like, yeah, it doesn't cost that much. Like, it's kind of free. Like, put it up on GitHub. And like, who cares if only one person follows it? Who cares? If only one person contributes to it, who cares? It's someone else who likes your software. I mean, that's great. There's nothing wrong with that. You know, as a software engineer, I like people that like my software, and I'm not looking to be a celebrity. I mean, we can be, it's fine. And so anyway, I think that for most things, they're small enough, they're low enough traffic, that GitHub is all the governance you need. But there are exceptions. Yeah, money ruins relationships, as it turns out. So there are a handful of open source projects that almost certainly don't apply to you, but did apply to us, that become so popular that multiple new commercial entities are founded around them. And this is, and we heard it in the keynotes this morning, this is what money does to relationships. Money ruins relationships. This is like winning the lottery for an open source project. It's like, oh, we won the lottery. It's like, yeah, you've read the studies though, right? Like, we're all going to get divorced now. Because you just find the band is going to break up. It's really, really hard. And as a corporate steward, you just can't be sufficiently neutral. And trust me, we tried. The commercial tensions are going to rip the project apart because you've got multiple companies that have just agendas that are too different in the room. And it doesn't matter that you're the one that's trying to adjudicate the dispute. You're another apex predator. It's like, I don't care what another apex predator. You're just trying to eat me. Like, no, I'm not trying to eat you. I swear. Like I know the dorsal fin. I know. It's like, can we? Let me just tape the dorsal fin down for a second, and then I can devour you. No. Did I say that or think it? No. But honestly, it's like the corporations just can't be neutral enough. It really has to go into a foundation, or can be better served in a foundation. It's very hard to internalize. Trust me, we struggle to internalize this. Because you think, like, I'm doing the best I can. Like, what is wrong with these people? It's like, well, it's not them or you. It's the situation. And it's the fact that you've got VC-funded companies that are now looking to differentiate on the technology that you open sourced or that you led. So, sorry, you need to go to Foundation. We learned this the hard way with Node.js. Docker is learning this the hard way. Hopefully, you don't have to learn this the hard way. Kubernetes actually is not learning it the hard way. To their credit, Kubernetes is going to Foundation earlier, and they're doing it on their own terms and in a better way with the Cloud Native Computing Foundation. Disclaimer, I'm on the technical advisory board, so there we go. There's that dorsal fin. Spring, whoa, no! But foundations have limitations. Foundations are not a panacea. They should only be used and created very, very sparingly because they actually pose more questions than they answer. How are board seats determined? Is this pay to play? Are these community elections? Are they code contributions? How are we going to figure out who decides what? How are conflicts resolved? This is kind of an important point, right? I mean, because when you've got multiple commercial entities, it's like the conflicts are not going to go away. I mean, to the contrary. So you've got to have a way you're going to resolve conflicts. What are the principles that guide the work? Does the mission of the foundation go beyond self-preservation? Because I think Apache is great, but Apache is not going to give you that mission. Apache is not going to give you a mission that goes beyond self-preservation. So you need to kind of answer those questions. Foundations are really only better than the alternatives. That's it. Foundations are undesirable in lots of ways. They are only modestly less undesirable than the alternative. So be very, very careful. We did this with Node, and it was a very painful experience. So in terms of leaping the chasm, there is still a chasm between proprietary and open source software, but it's narrowing a lot. Open source is winning. I don't care how proprietary the firmware is on your phone. The open source is actually winning, especially in infrastructure software. Much, much, much easier to open source when you're still young. Open source it in the cradle, please. Please, please, please. Open source it when you only need to ask your L1 manager or what have you. Open source it when you can do it yourself. And for commercial entities, again, it's shifted from when do I open source, is it right to open source, to when do I need to go put this into a foundation? That's now the real question. I'm sure we're doing some things wrong. I'm hoping that they're going to open up the call for papers, call for presentations to OSCON 2025. As soon as they do, you come back to my OSCON 2025 talk. I don't know. It'll be interesting to see if I still have the kind of the piss and vinegar. I think I'll still be as angry as Oracle. So we'll see. Who knows? I'll be older, but it won't be that old. I plan to die with my boots on, people. By the way, I am not going into the sunset. I'm sorry. Anyway, thank you very much. Huge thanks to the joint engineers that made this happen. And also, did I mention that we're hiring? So thank you very much.